Hey everybody, welcome to Get to Know Your Wedding Pro. My name is Reed with Best Made Videos. We are a wedding videography company based out of West Seattle, Washington. And today I'm joined by a very special friend of mine, a long-term friend, Chris Beck of Chinook Photography. He is located up in Canada now, but we have spent quite a few years working together in the Seattle market. And I have gotten the technology now to be able to do podcasts remotely. And I figured that this would be a great chance to catch up with Chris and test out this new technology. And Chris, thank you so much for being here. Why don't you introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what you do.
Hey, thanks, Reed. It's great to be here. Great to be part of this. I really enjoyed your podcast, so it's crazy to see us here actually doing this now. So my name is Chris Beck. I'm a full-time wedding photographer. I am based out of Banff, Alberta, Canada. I've been doing this now full-time for about 10 years, but I've only been in Canada for maybe 3 years now, I guess. I was originally in the Seattle market. I was there for about 2 years. And what was the other question?
And so, just talk a little bit about, so you're a wedding photographer. What kinds of things do you like to take photos of?
Oh, okay. So weddings, I do 100% weddings. I try to specialize just in that. So I don't do seniors. I don't do anything else. But I also do landscape and wildlife photography, and I try to keep those two kind of separate because that really still is fun to me, and it's not work. So I think when I'm not shooting weddings, I'm definitely out shooting animals and wildlife. And I'm originally from Alaska, where I had a chance to do a lot of wildlife photography. The Banff area that I live in now is just incredible for wildlife. And my first wedding in Banff, I was able to actually get bighorn sheep in with a bride and groom. It was like the perfect mesh of two worlds for me. Yeah.
And Chris always tries to get my goat by sending all these awesome shots of all these epic mountain ranges and lakes and all this really cool stuff, and saying, "Look at all this cool stuff I get to photograph up here that I don't get to take any part of that." Chris, I always appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's fun, and at the same token, I wish you could get up here and we could do some stuff. That'd be awesome.
So talk to me, and I don't know if I really know this, talk about kind of how you got into photography. You said you've been doing this now full-time 10 years. Did you study that in school, or how did you get about doing that?
So when I was in high school, I did take photography classes, and we used film, and I wasn't a big fan of film. I hated kind of sticking my hands in this dark box and trying to roll film, and then I really hated the dark room. That was just such a chore. I just wanted to be out shooting things, and my instructor was kind of hardcore. And we'd go on the hallway to do different assignments, depth of field, and all these different kinds of things, and action shots. We'd end up going to the gymnasium, but I would usually leave campus and kind of go around, and I would take pictures like cats and dogs and all this other stuff that's around, and I would always get in trouble because he said I wouldn't take my photography serious. And then I was on the yearbook staff with him, hoping to take photos and do more advanced stuff. But he took the camera away from me, made me go sell ads and kind of deal with the business side of things. So I was pretty frustrated with that. But I put the camera down because I didn't have the money for all the film and all the developing. But I was always interested and always followed it, always had an eye for it. Just was kind of a part of who I was. And it wasn't until, maybe 10 years later that I picked up a digital and just got obsessed with it. I had a full-time job at the time and just became obsessed with photography. And it was kind of cool to have that outlet. And wildlife photography, I had some friends that were doing it, so I was getting interested in that. And my first real experience with wildlife photography was spending time with a wolf in Juneau, Alaska. And with wildlife, you can't tell them to stop, go back into the light, compose something. You can't think about it. You got to get it right. It's got to be, 100% all the time. And it's not, but that's just kind of the thrill of the chase. And so when I was in this small town in Alaska, I was asked to shoot a wedding. There wasn't really any wedding photographers. And I was very nervous about doing it, but excited at the same time. But I never saw myself as a wedding photographer. It seemed kind of boring and cliche. I really wanted to do more wildlife stuff. But as I was at the wedding and these moments were unfolding, it felt like I was back with that wolf. I really wanted to catch genuine moments that weren't staged. And you had to get it right. And you had to know, your gear well enough to make sure that you did it right. I shot 2 weddings in that town, and I was lucky enough to get published in a wedding magazine, which was kind of shocking. And that just lit the phone up. I was getting lots of phone calls about doing weddings. And I thought, wow, this is really a great opportunity here, but I'm not ready for it. I don't want to be 2 or 3 weddings into this thing and then all of a sudden say, hey, I'm a wedding photographer. I had a buddy who had been a wedding photographer for, since he was like 16 years old. And he was very successful in Alaska. And I ended up moving to the town he was in and working with him. I said, listen, I'm going to take a few steps back. Just show me the ropes. Let me just do this right. I felt I had to earn my keep in the industry. So I was a second shooter, and he really challenged me. He really put me through the ringer to build my skill set. And it was the best thing I could have done. I think from a career move at that crossroads of saying, hey, I'm going to do this on my own, or I'm going to learn it from my buddy, that was the way to go, because it just controlled the environment. He handled all the business side while I could just focus on the technical side. And it was great. I mean, I'd get these emails saying, hey, on Saturday, you're going to be here and, whatever, and fill up my schedule, my calendar. And it just, being surrounded by professional wedding photographers, it was amazing. It was just a great chance to build a good portfolio and be challenged in our skill set, because I'd be at a wedding and I'd get a text from one of the other guys and they'd say, hey, look what I'm doing right now. And you're just like, dang it, I've got to beat that. I've got to do something better. And it was a lot of fun. And it wasn't until I moved to Seattle that at the time I was teaching wildlife and landscape photography classes. And I owned a business that did cruise boat wildlife tours every day. And in the off season, well, actually, I remember I was sitting in a lodge in Valdez. We were photographing bears, and I had some clients. I'm sorry. Let me backtrack. So I'm in Seattle. I've got a season off. I decided let me try to do some wedding photography in Seattle, and I felt like everybody was a photographer. And that it was just like being a needle in a stack of needles. They're just how do you separate yourself? But that's where kind of the business side kicked in. I had learned the technical side, so I focused a little bit more on the business and figured out who my ideal client was. And once I zeroed in on that process, I could really kind of pick them out of a crowd and launch the website, started it, and it just took off like wildfire. And that fall, I was in Alaska at a bear photography clinic I was teaching, and I had turned down 12 inquiries for weddings for that 1 week that I was in shooting the bears. And from a financial aspect, I'm like, man, that would have been a little bit more lucrative. I got to pick my battles here. I think I need to really commit to being a full-time wedding photographer. So I let all the wildlife and landscape stuff go and focused on the weddings. And there was no turning back. And it was great to get up and running in Seattle. And my wife, who's a vet and who is Canadian, had an opportunity to come back to Canada and work here. So for her professional development, it was too good of a chance to turn away. So it was a tough discussion, but we agreed and ended up transitioning rather quickly and coming to Canada. Yeah, so I was living in Canada. I didn't have my work permit yet. I was flying back to Seattle basically every weekend to do weddings there. And once I got my work permit, I had to kind of start over with building another business. And I felt like it was deja vu being in Seattle. Same thing. Lots of photographers here. It's going to be a tough market. But I, having learned everything I did in Seattle, replicated it here and implemented that business plan. And this is my first full year, January to December this year. And I'll finish up with 45 weddings here, which I think is fantastic for my first year.
Yeah, and you're kind of like me. That we're kind of a quantity not over quality, but we're kind of a quantity based. I think we both operate more on the quantity based kind of standard that we hold ourselves to, just in terms of kind of the number of weddings. Would you agree with that?
I do agree. Knowing who my ideal client is, it is going to be a numbers-based system for sure. And I would rather, as a photographer, I know it's going to piss off a lot of photographers, but I would rather be there the day of, shoot the wedding, edit the photos, hand them over, move on to the next one. And it's quite common to shoot 3 or 4 weddings a week, which isn't an issue for me.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I think in the same regard, there's a lot of videographers that, want to spend 6 months, working on something and to deliver to the client. And I certainly appreciate that. And I do think that there is a client base for that and there's a budget for that. But I think that a lot of people just want their photos and want their video. I just had a Skype testimonial tonight with the client, and just because of timing with their wedding, I was able to deliver their stuff they were watching on their honeymoon, and like that was super valuable to them. Whereas if I had taken 9 months, to deliver it, we're talking tonight. I mean, they've been married for 9 months. I mean, it's a totally different world than if you're delivering kind of on that scale. So I want to backtrack now because you gave a lot of talking points there kind of in your story that I think is really interesting. So when you were doing the wildlife, what did you said you didn't think you wanted to be a wedding photographer. You thought it was really boring. I mean, what were some like common misconceptions or whatever that you had looking at the field now that you think maybe were justified or silly or whatnot now that you are a wedding photographer?
I think for me, when I looked at wildlife photography, it was about just being somewhere that people might not get themselves to. So it's about telling a story about animals, especially bears. I really dig the carnivores, if you will, bears, wolves, and especially where I lived in Alaska, in Juneau, there was killer whales and just anything dangerous like that. Was just a feeling that in the moment I'm there and it's sensory overload. I wanted to portray that in a lot of the photos. And to think about wedding photography, I just didn't get that same vibe. It to me, and not knowing, I didn't shoot any weddings. I didn't know. The whole thought of doing it was just, I don't want to say mundane. I mean, I'd have to think of the right word, but just the thought of it was just like not the same. I mean, when I'm here with a bear, I'm scared to death. And with a bride, I don't want to get bored, and I don't want to, lose the impact of the images where I feel you would get with wildlife. But it was actually quite the opposite. You're trying to really make an incredible image for somebody, and much like you are with wildlife, and just that drive was just like, oh my gosh, I've got to do something that just drops their jaws, that just makes them feel amazed that this happened and validates their decision on who they chose to shoot it. Yeah.
And so I would say that, when you talk with like a lot of photo and video people, and they always say like, when clients are looking at like a website or they're looking for, photos or video that, you have like 2 or 3 photos, right, to like kind of get their, attention or get their whatever. Like, do you always focus on that and like producing quality like that? Or like, what do you think about like trying to catch people's eyes the same way with wedding photos as you did with wildlife?
Well, I think when it comes to the website, it's kind of an interesting concept because somebody gave me some advice when I was trying to figure out how to design and build a website that you have a second to catch their attention, and one photo might hit somebody but not somebody else. So if you kind of limit that series that you're showing to a few, you may not catch everybody. And somebody said that if you look at a store window and in the store there's a display, that's going to choose whether or not you go in that store. And the more stuff that's there that catches your eye, you might see something you like, and you're then opted to go inside of there. But as a photographer, I think it's tough to, you might have 1 or 2 images from a wedding that you're impressed with and you want to show everybody, but it's about consistency. It needs to be deep on the bench as far as the entire day to have it stick. So I think even though we're trying to catch their attention with 1 or 2 images, it's then when they say, all right, let me see the rest, let me see an entire wedding, that you have to be consistent. And I think that's a struggle for a lot of photographers, is to maintain that consistency. The guy that helped build my career in Alaska, I'll never forget, I was struggling as a photographer, trying to make my way in the industry. And we were about to board a flight, and somebody asked us, they go, "Are you all professional photographers?" And I used to be nervous around him because he really was so good at what he did, and definitely was a full-time professional photographer. And I was just kind of struggling with my identity there. And when they asked me that, I said, "Oh, no, I'm not. I'm just kind of an amateur, just learning this." But it was an awkward moment. He really picked up on that. And he looked at me and he said, what's your definition of a professional photographer? And I said, "Oh, I don't know. I've heard different things. And I suppose it's somebody who makes more than 50% of their income, blah, blah, blah," whatever that textbook kind of answer might be. And he laughed at me. And he said, no. A professional photographer is somebody who knows their equipment and their gear well enough to make something out of nothing. And that's your job. When you show up at a place, you've got to capture these amazing images, no matter where you are, whether it be mountains in the background, that's easy to do, or incredible landscapes, or if you're stuck in a hotel because it's raining, you have to produce just amazing imagery.
And so did that really make you kind of reevaluate your entire life, Chris?
Oh, yeah, it really did. It really did. It was like, oh, crap, I got a lot more work to do here. But that's just the pursuit of excellence. And I think when you're, you hear some of these analogies, like if Wolfgang Puck showed up into my kitchen and grabbed my crappy gear, he's going to make an amazing meal because he knows how to do it. And he knows what to do with the tools that are in front of him. If I show up in Wolfgang Puck's kitchen, I'm not going to know what to do. And I think sometimes in photography, people get caught up in the gear acquisition. That's an amazing image. What lens did you use? Boy, I need that lens. You don't. I think it's kind of fun to challenge yourself and try to do with, less stuff and see what you can do and just push the limits. But you have to know your gear well enough to make that happen.
It's interesting because I think I'm in the speaking of just professional and the definition of that and everything. It's interesting because for years when I worked in TV, I think at least I looked at it more kind of just like a day-to-day job, like you would have, whether it be at Starbucks or whatever. You go in, you get your stuff, you suit up, you go, you do it, you take it back, and then you go home, and then the next day, I didn't really look at it like, oh, I'm this like professional, whatever. But then, when you kind of start, putting the pieces together, and especially, starting the business and everything, and then it is a weird, at least for me, a weird switch of people do pay me now, specifically me or the people that I work with, to do this or to produce this or to produce that. It is really kind of an interesting, I never really thought about it that way. I always just figured when I was in news, like, oh, well, if I don't work out, they could just find somebody else or another guy on the shift could probably do it. It's a different way to kind of change my mindset.
But I've seen your work and I've seen what you do, and you're always pushing yourself to that next level. I've seen your dress shots, man. You're like, trying to capitalize on you got to do better than you did last time. And I love that about you. And I think you, like me, when you're at a wedding or you're with these people, there's that fear factor of like, I have to do something amazing and I've got to make it work. And if it ever becomes like the news where you're just kind of there, you're just clocking in, then I shouldn't be in this industry anymore for me, if that's the way it's going to be. If I just don't have that passion and that fear to just kill it,
Yeah. So when you said, to backtrack again now in your story, so when you got that digital camera and you started shooting, you said you were working. What were you doing before you kind of transitioned to wildlife photography?
I was doing banking and compliance. Very boring stuff.
So how did the banker become someone hanging out with bears shooting wildlife? Was that something? I don't even know how that transition happens.
It's kind of interesting. So. It was like 2008, so it was around kind of the down market. Banking was having some issues and cutbacks and all that stuff. And I was in Alaska, and I was so hooked on photography. I was addicted to it. I didn't sit there and think, I've got to earn money from this thing. I just tried to figure out, how can I do this more? And there were so many places in Alaska I wanted to go see, but it's expensive to visit. You got to get on a flight. It's just like, being in Seattle, you got to fly somewhere different to get different kinds of photos. So using my banking background, I hadn't shot weddings yet. I was interested in wildlife. I took a job at a bank that would actually fly me to 12 different locations in Alaska. And because banks close at a certain time, like 5, I had the rest of the time to photograph. So I was traveling to like these cool places and doing cool things, but I wasn't the best photographer. I was like missing opportunities, still trying to figure out the relationship between, f-stop and ISOs. But it was just that frustration of learning the system and applying it to the setting that I'm in that just consumed me. And because of what I did at work, being compliance stuff, I could spend a lot of time at work. They were paying me essentially to do photography, just to sit there and do this stuff. So it was perfect. I didn't want to leave this world. And a lot of people around me knew that's kind of what was going on. And then I took a full-time position in Juneau. Out of the places I traveled, there was a place in Alaska, Juneau, Alaska, I absolutely loved. So I took a 2-year assignment with the bank to go there. And the thing I loved about Juneau is that you had everything between whales and bears and landscape and wildlife. And if we were sitting there in summer, Reed, and you were like, hey, let's go see some bears, I could take you and we'd see them. It was that easy. And that was incredible. And that was awesome. So that day job is what helped me do that. But I realized also that, the thought of being a photographer that has a gallery is not as lucrative, not as common as it used to be. I really felt that the business model was taking people with camera gear to those locations to let them capture those images themselves. And that's where I kind of saw the business opportunity when I was learning and doing this stuff. And that's where I kind of started seeing the transition from a full-time job to doing photography full-time. Was I've got to take people to these locations and help them do it. And that's where the first transition started happening to becoming a full-time photographer. And in the meantime, I did some weddings, and that kind of complemented what I was doing. But because I didn't want to do weddings full time, because I just wanted to learn the business more, there was never a conflict of quitting my job to become a wedding photographer. Because what I've seen a lot of people do is they immediately quit their job once they have a few good successes with wedding photography. And the position I didn't want to be in was, hey, I got to pay my mortgage, so I'm going to have to do some babies and some families and some seniors and stuff I didn't want to do in order to pay bills. And that was a world I didn't want to get caught up in. And when I was working full-time, knew it was time to leave full-time work when I was actually turning assignments away. I was turning weddings away. I was turning opportunities down because work was getting in the way. And that's when I had that moment of like, okay, now it's time to leave.
And so then you had started, right, taking people to these. I mean, how did that? It's such an interesting concept for me that would be where you kind of saw that niche where you fit in there. I mean, how did that even? Most people just, I'm going to go, like you said, take some baby photos or whatever. I mean, how did you think to build this, business of taking people to these places?
Well, when I was in Juneau, Alaska, it's known for being a big pit stop for cruise boats. And so a small town of 30,000 people would see 12,500 people arrive on the shores each day looking for something to do. And so because the job I had lots of free time, I would do the math and say, you know what, if I took 10 people from a cruise boat and took them out and showed them different things around town to take photos of, and they paid anywhere from $50 to $100 a day, what's the math on this? And it was pretty impressive. And that's what kind of started the business gears turning. How do I do that? What's the scale of economy here? How do I get into that market? And I went to go talk to the cruise company about doing this because they sell a lot of the tours. And I said, guys, I'm interested in doing this. Here's the math. Here's the scale. This is perfect. And they said, 10 is too few. When you're ready to do 100, let us know. 100 people a day. And then we'll consider booking this for you. And that blew my mind. Like, I can't handle 100 people. How do you go from 0 to 100 people here? There's gotta be a transitional step here. As I was caught up in that mindset of trying to build that business plan, that's when the weddings came along. And that's when I was shooting my first couple of weddings. and getting interested in them, but I still saw this opportunity for the business plan of wildlife and landscape. And my 2 years was up in June. It was time to go back to Anchorage. And that's when I called my buddy and was like, hey, what if I help? What if I carry your bags and just kind of learn the industry? And he was super excited. And he needed the help because he was turning away a lot more weddings. So he would hire other photographers to book them and fill their calendars. And I think at one point he was up to about 6 full-time photographers. So it was nice for me to pick up those real weird odds and ends because I was still working full-time to complement his business side. But that's when I went back to Anchorage, did the wedding stuff, figured out a system there where I could make it work, and decided to give it a shot. One summer I'm going to go down to Juneau and run summer tours. And what gave me that opportunity was I had sold some week-long excursions of bear and wildlife tours at remote lodges in Alaska, where I would guide those. And that's what helped pay the bills while I could focus on that day-to-day operation in Juneau. And at the time we were talking about moving to Seattle. So I thought that's a good compliment because I can live in Seattle and in the summer, live in Alaska and do weddings and do wildlife tours, and this would be perfect. So that was the plan. So I'm like, rolling my sleeves, neck deep in that stuff, trying to build that business. And then when I'm in Seattle in the off season, that's where I thought, okay, let me try weddings here and just see how that goes. And boy, that just took off. And I had to give everything up on the landscape and wildlife side. And I had spent so much time, dealing with the landscape and the wildlife and teaching people that I really did hit a great level of notoriety in Alaska. I had galleries selling my stuff. Canon every now and then would ask me to teach wildlife and photography classes for their Canon members. So I mean, it was really exciting to be a part of that and to look at a business decision and say, I love what I'm doing here with wildlife. This is passionate. I do enjoy weddings, but I can really make a better business out of weddings than I can with that wildlife stuff. That was a hard decision to give all that up and just focus on weddings.
No, I bet. And were you married at the time then already?
We were together, but I don't know if we weren't married yet. But we were together.
Yeah, I mean, but that had to have been a difficult decision, to weigh kind of the two sides and go with that. I mean, that's fascinating.
You know what the hardest decision was? I mean, I'm completely healthy. There was no issues, but quitting a job and losing benefits. Yeah. That was always kind of like a weird, I think it sucks. I don't want to get political, but I think that just sucks that as a business owner, whether it be small or having a couple employees, something as simple as benefits, it could make the decision or not to do something like that.
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, Dorothy's a teacher. I mean, that's why, we benefit from that because, Seattle Public Schools.
Yeah. So, I mean, here's your factor. You can't, you're down to the core of the decision of saying, being full-time and what do I want to do and how do I deal with that issue? That's tough. Those are tough factors.
Another thing I wanted to comment on and get to expand a little bit, you said when you started doing those first couple weddings and getting the notoriety and you kind of self-policing yourself and deciding, I need to take some more time here to get, the skill set and, do you see that a lot now or not? And I mean, that to me, that's not the norm. Like you said, a lot of people do, a wedding or two and then quit and think that they're going to make this. And was that difficult or was that an easy decision as a banker and someone that dealt with that to take the time to plan it out, or where did that come about?
It's I know exactly what you're asking. It's tough to characterize the industry, if you will. I feel that more people are just diving in head first and perhaps doing it a bit early. But those people that are doing that may not have the option of going a little bit slower like I did. I knew some people. And the funny thing about it, like the guy that helped me out, the whole reason we met is because somebody had asked me to shoot a wedding. So I was doing some research really on, looking up different wedding photographers, looking at their stuff. And this was, gosh, I don't even know what year it was, 2009? where there wasn't a whole lot of stuff, not like it is now. And I came across this guy's website. I never even met him, but that moment got me so hooked on with this guy, and I had to learn more from him. That for some reason through that process, I think we were on Facebook and ended up chatting a little bit, and that's kind of how our friendship grew. So I mean, really, it came from just reaching out and saying, "Hey, can you help me?" And I think one cool thing about our industry is that when perceived competitors reach out for help or with an olive branch, they're usually well received, saying, "Hey, come on in, let's chat, let's talk about this stuff, let's hang out." You know, it's really kind of a cool core community. And I think if somebody who wants to jump in the industry, who says it's either all or nothing because I don't know anybody, they could take a moment there and reach out to a few people, and just kind of introduce themselves and say, "Hey, here's what's going on." Here in the Banff area, there was actually a gentleman who had been laid off and was into photography. He was big in backcountry stuff and did some landscape stuff, and he had some pretty good portfolios. Shot a friend's wedding, and he was addicted. He's like, "I want to do this." And so he reached out to me, and we went out and had some coffee. And he said, "I really want to do this full time. This is what I want to do, and I want to learn. Can I come and follow you and learn from you?" And it was an interesting moment because I was like, "Hey, I'll hang out with you and we can certainly have these conversations, but I can't teach you the business in this market and then set you free to go compete against me. That's kind of tough." But he was so determined to be his own guy that he charged forward to make that happen. And, a week later, he had his own website, touted his wedding photography, but he had never shot a full wedding. And, we'll see how he does.
How has he done?
He called a lot of friends. I mean, his stuff is fantastic. Where he's really going to earn his keep is when he's in a bad lighting situation and he's really trying, needs to make that situation work. That's where he's going to have to learn either to make it work or learn the skill set to make it happen. Because it's easy when you have nice, beautiful golden sunset and a mountain behind you to get some really good stuff. But he is asking a lot of friends to come out and kind of develop his portfolio. So he's doing the groundwork to make it work. And now we'll just see on the back end with the bookings how he can do. And I wish him luck. And I always told him I'm here to help. And we could certainly go have coffee again and we can talk about, things to be successful.
So when you arrived in Seattle then and decided to kind of make the weddings go for it, you said earlier on that you were kind of overwhelmed with like the number of photographers here. And what was kind of your initial, now that, in this part of the story, now we've arrived at Seattle, what was your initial kind of thoughts here?
Seattle was intimidating because, like I said, I came from a place in Alaska where there was no wedding photographers. So you're just like, yeah, I've got a camera and I can figure this out. I mean, that was the ability to score a couple weddings, to then go in and compete in a market with some very established photographers. And my portfolio was 100% Alaska based. So to go into a new market and say, listen, I've never shot there before, I've never been to this venue. Those were all obstacles you have to kind of find a way to overcome. But then I needed to know specifically who my ideal client was. And I know that I don't want the Ritz-Carlton $100,000 budget, crazy detailed weddings. That's not me. And if somebody called me and asked me to do that, I honestly would probably refer it on to somebody else because, and I'm not saying 100,000 photography budget, but like total budget for the wedding and everything. Cause that's just not me. I love the kind of grassroots backyard barn in a field, kind of realistic weddings. That's me. That's who I want to be with. And that's what I want to photograph. And so in choosing my portfolio and what I showed, I really wanted to cater to those brides that would see this stuff and just be like, yeah, that's it. That's what I want. And, consistently see the images that deliver that message. That's my audience. That's who I want to be in front of. And when I put stuff up in Seattle, with it being an Alaskan portfolio, it seemed like everybody that called me had some sort of affiliation with Alaska, whether wanting to be there or from there or had lived there. But what was resonating was, man, you do outdoor stuff and mountains, and we're in Washington, and Washington offers that opportunity. We want somebody that really specializes in outdoor stuff.
Yeah, and I do think it's a similar, I think Alaska is probably more impressive to, like me in Seattle. Like that to me, like feels more impressive, and same with Canada, but it is kind of that similar outdoor, not as wide of open space, but still wide open space. I think you and me, I would say are both, hustlers at heart. Do you think that that's what kind of helped you stand out in Seattle too? Or was it just kind of having that technical skill or a charming personality? Or what do you think kind of helped you break through? And I do mean that, coming in and not having the portfolio and kind of having a lot against you. How did you kind of stand out?
So, being sitting there and realizing, okay, I've spent the past, I don't know, 3 or 4 years focusing on wildlife and landscape and building that stuff up, to sit there, literally it was like September, and I've kind of got a clean slate and go, okay, do I do wedding photography? And I'm starting from zero. I didn't have a template of what I was going to do. So it was a lot of trial and error stuff. But I knew I had to hustle, and trying to figure out what the best method to make an impact on the market and get that start. I knew I had to know other people in the market. And so that's when I started calling people and studying what is the average price of a wedding in that market? What is the average price for photography in that market? Where are the successful venues that are in town, and where am I willing to go? And I think you and I have that same mentality of like, we'll go anywhere. You tell me where you want to go, I'll go. Because it's an adventure, so I knew I didn't want to limit myself to just a specific geographical area within Seattle. Let's just open the doors and figure out what's going on. But I also got involved in, I would call venues that I really liked, that stood out to me, that I hadn't been to before, and said, listen, I would love to sit down and just talk with you and just meet you. Because referrals are one of the photographer's biggest assets in gathering clients. And in doing so, I would go and I would take photos and I would put stuff on a blog and try to get SEO content for that specific site so that it would then be searchable. And it was just kind of building it from there. And I knew nothing about I knew a little bit about websites. I knew nothing about WordPress. And so sitting there, I was spending a lot of time researching SEO and what is a good website presence. And boy, was I spending $30 here and $30 there for these stupid little widgets, and second guessing myself, and just really spending too much time on that website to tweak it. But really it came down to content of what's on there. And since I didn't have the content in the area that I wanted to be, I had to create it. And to create it, I had to get creative by meeting people, by shooting just plain old venue stuff that was kind of boring and maybe even blank, until I could get something booked and get there and deal with it. And then I also had to learn a story to tell clients, like, yeah, I've never shot there before, but guess what? It doesn't bother me. It doesn't scare me. That really entices me.
Do you see a lot of that same hustle that you have today with other people, or do you think that that's unique to you, or what do you think about that?
My honest opinion, I think that if you want to be successful in the business, you've got to hustle. That's where you're going to be, make it or break it. For every 10 photographers that come out, one is going to have that hustle and they're going to succeed. And those other 9 are going to fight it. And they may be caught up in the gear side of it and think, I don't have a full frame camera yet. I'm still shooting with a crop sensor, and that's my issue. That's why my photos aren't good. That's why this isn't good. It really comes down to understanding who your client is, understanding how to market towards them, and then working within the vendors that are around you to endorse you, to be a good referral, to have that bride recognize you and then validate you somehow by talking to a venue, going, yeah, no, he's never been here, but we've met him. He's super nice. That's going to make the difference. It's those little things that help. And when the business comes, and it will come, then you got to keep up on that game. You can't lose it.
I've talked with a lot of different people on the podcast about, the challenges of running a business, and, people want, like, if you want to be a florist or do video or photo or whatever, and, you spend so much time not actually doing photography or anything else. You've always struck me as someone that is really good at doing the business stuff. And maybe that's a good front that you put on that I buy, but it does seem like you really have that locked down. Is that a strength that you have? Is that something you've had to work towards?
I think it's intuitive to me. My background is business, and especially with my degree, but it's not easy. And I don't think anybody, if somebody says it's easy, I think they're lying, because there's always something you can tweak. There's always something on your to-do list that you feel you can make better. And for every opportunity of learning photography, there needs to be equal balance on learning something business oriented. And I'm going through this right now with my nephews that are kind of almost college aged. And we've been talking about this. One has gotten into photography, and he's like, what should I do in college? And I'm like, you need to get a business degree, like focus on business, because you can pick up the photography stuff later if that's what you want to do. It'd be awesome to get a combo degree, but some schools don't offer that. But, for me, I've got this list of business related tasks that I really need to spend more time on. And that's my frustration within growing my own business. And those things are always going to be there. I don't know that I'll ever be at a point where I'm like perfect. Everything from, presentation to contract delivery to follow-up is perfect. And we can just move along and have a nice day. I don't know that it'll ever be that way, because I always think, can I do it better? Can I do it differently? And where I appreciate that compliment, I think on the business side, and I'm just being bluntly honest for everybody who's doing this, it's something you have to continue to develop and keep working on, and every year reassess what worked, what didn't, what can I change, and what can I learn from.
Yeah, it's funny because I've been seeing people more now than I did during the summer at, social engagements and other things. And that's always the common question I get is like, oh, isn't it so great now that, aren't you just so much slower and the seasons die down? Because, Seattle is like super seasonal in terms of weddings. And I said, well, yeah, but now I have like 1,000 different projects that I haven't touched. I haven't done anything except shoot or edit the wedding since, Memorial Day. So it's hard to. Right. I mean, do you find that too?
Oh, totally. So, I've got this long list staring at me here at the desk of things that I need business-wise to work on. And you're right. You're going into that cyclical side where you're kind of finishing things up and excited about, this is my last year, but then you're nervous about next year. And you're focusing on, the wedding show is coming up and the acquisition, and am I on track? From my December numbers, are they equal to or greater to last December when you look at business things, and what am I doing differently? What can I do better? But you have a lot of business stuff that I got to get to, and it's hard to prioritize it for sure.
When it comes to
you and I don't mean to cut you off. You and I got along because we were sitting at a wedding and we started talking about that. Like, what are you doing? What trips do you have? What tricks are you using? And you showed me some pretty cool stuff for the website that I was blown away with. And I think that's one thing that's cool about our industry is we're willing to share that stuff. Hey, did you try this? No, I don't even know what that is. What is that? Oh, that's cool. Let me add that to my list. I'll figure that out in February,
Well, we also met at probably one of the all-time memorable weddings that we showed up in. I guess I don't even think I had Jeff at that point. So it was just me and it was just you.
Yep.
And I do get a little intimidated when it's another male photographer, because I do worry a little bit about the machismo kind of, I tend to get along a little bit better with the brides and the female photographers. And I remember you showing up and it was just like this bundle of energy and excitement, which obviously resonates with me. And I think it was that one of the maids of honor came in or whatever and met us in the lobby to take us back to where everybody was. And we, you or I say, oh, how's everyone doing today? And, you normally always get the like, everyone's great. It's fine. It's, whatever. And she goes, oh, well, it's actually really terrible right now. One of the one bridal party had had some inappropriate relations with one of the other bridal party the night before, and it was leaving chaos. And I think it took us a minute to realize, like, to try to figure out if that, like, if she was pulling our chain or not.
Yeah,
right? Do you remember that?
Oh yeah. And then I kind of remember us looking at each other, not knowing each other, just like, oh boy. And then we just kicked it into professional mode. We gotta do what we gotta do. We're here.
You know, and like, I think the bride had got ready, like, in the side room, like in the same room where they were putting the flowers and stuff together. I mean, it was just kind of like not a DIY wedding, but it was certainly a DIY kind of photo and video kind of day, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we were doing things to stay busy, that's for sure.
Yeah. Talk about just the actual wedding days, coming from wildlife and besides the business of it, how do you keep that fresh? You know, how do you keep, like you said, you used to kind of be chasing bears and wolves and stuff. And how do you keep that day to day fresh in terms of, the actual wedding day?
So I think it would surprise people. So I came from Alaska into Seattle, now in Canada, 3 different markets, 3 different arenas, if you will. So in Seattle, the craziest thing is I probably never met 95% of my brides and grooms until the day of their wedding. And that was weird. To walk into a room, a hotel room, and look at a group of guys and just kind of wander around and be like, hey, are you the groom? How you doing? Nice to meet you finally. And I would offer for us to get together. I would never force it, but I would certainly say, hey, listen, I'd love to get together, buy a beer, buy a coffee, let's chat, let's hang out. And a lot of them were like, no, we're good. We'll see you there. And that always blew my mind. So walking into the weddings that I typically do is nothing but chaos. I have one for Saturday here that I am forcing with her, trying to get some sort of organized agenda, and she just doesn't want to do it necessarily. It's not really important to her. It's an all-day wedding. I'll be there for 12 hours. And all I know is that the ceremony's at 1, dinner's at 5, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. That, I think, would drive some photographers nuts. They have to be structured. Like, I need to know what's going on every second of the day. I don't want to miss anything. I need all this information. I got to have all this stuff planned out. We need to meet 56 times before. But that going with the flow and spontaneity really keeps it fresh for every wedding, because I never know what's going to happen. I never know what's going to go on. I shot a wedding today. As a matter of fact, I just got a text from the groom. The bride got so sick they had to take her to the emergency room. So I mean, every wedding is different. So he's letting me know she's okay. Everything's fine. Thanks for showing up today. We appreciate it. But I think if a very organized photographer was to look at my setup and realize your weddings are very chaotic, I can't manage in that. That's again reason that I'm dealing with the perfect target audience. And that's how it stays fresh. I just never know what's going on.
I had no idea you just shot a wedding today.
Yeah.
Well, and it's late. It's late for you, right?
Well, it was only supposed to be 4 hours. But then after 2 hours, she was like, I don't feel well. I'm going to bed. You can go home. Oh, okay. Did
they get married?
I think so. So in Canada, the commissioners are, there's only a few of them, and you have to get one of them available. And they do literally, it's a verbal contract. They're reading a verbal contract, and then you sign the documentation. And my understanding is they were going to do that bedside while she was pretty sick.
Oh my gosh.
They didn't want photos. And I tried to get them, like, guys, I know you're sick. I know you're going to hate every one of these photos, but we should at least document this, because this is what's happening. And you're going to tell everybody the rest of your life, she was in bed sick, and signed the document, and you should at least have photos of that. But they were like, no, you're good. We don't want that. Have a nice day. But that would have been cool.
Would have been different. Would have been some for the portfolio.
Yeah, for sure. That would have been awesome. So every day's different. Every wedding's different.
I think it's an understatement to ask, but was it challenging then transitioning again from Seattle back up to Canada? Just in terms of learning a whole new market again. And I mean, we had kind of touched, the licensing and trying to get all that applied, but just in terms of now this is the third totally different community and totally different set of rules and totally different pricing, besides the whole international thing, just, establishing in another environment.
Oh, it was tough. It was absolutely tough because you're just, it's like pushing a rock uphill, and you fight through the start of it. You get halfway up the hill. You can always look at your momentum and realize, look how far I've come. I'm not at my goals yet, but I've got some history in the market, and I can keep pushing this thing. And to go from that in Seattle, where I've pushed that rock like halfway up the mountain, to Calgary, to like the Banff area, where I'm like, man, I'm at the bottom of the hill with this big ass rock again. Here we go. Oh, that sucked. It really did. But luckily, I was able to navigate through my trials and errors. I looked back at Seattle and said, all right, what did I do there that worked when I started and what didn't work? And I know I spent a lot of time spinning my wheels with WordPress and the widgets and all that nonsense that it helped make my decision on choosing Squarespace to run my website now, little things like that. I'm going to not necessarily cut corners, but learn from those mistakes of the past and just streamline it to get that rock going further and faster. But yeah, boy, did it suck. And then, looking at it now I'm a year into it, with my first full year. So I started like August of last year. And so my first full calendar year this year, I have no template. So if I look at January, where should I be? Where was I at last year? I don't have any January numbers from last year for this market. So you're still kind of creating that starting point, which is tough.
Yeah, I told Dorothy when we moved, or when we were going to move, because when I was still in TV, that was always the thought is, you move to a bigger market or do whatever. And when we decided, we didn't want to move, and I said, well, if I'm going to start this, it's going to be a cold day in hell before I have to start this again, because I just couldn't imagine having to do it now, not once but twice like you have. I just think it's commendable, and to still be shooting weddings and stuff in between and flying, and I mean, it's just absolutely incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, it was tough. And I don't know if I could do it again. Like, if that ever came up again, I'd probably go, I don't know. I don't know what I'd do. And there's this funny story that like somebody like you and me will work 80 hours a week for fear of having to get a regular job and working 40 hours a week.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? That's our fear. I don't want to work an 8 to 5. That scares me to death. I'd rather work 8 to 8.
Yeah.
Or 8 to midnight. And you're funny too, because I'll text you and it'll be like midnight and you answer. And then I'm up at like 7 in the morning, 6 your time, and you're like, hey, I'm still here. What's up? And I don't know if you're up late or up early. I can never figure it out, but you're always going. You're all business.
What is, and this could be one of many, but to kind of get to land this plane here soon, what would be one of the greatest lessons you've learned in kind of the last 10 years in terms of, and they could be in terms of business, in terms of photography. If you have a couple, that would be great too. But just a kind of a lesson, and you've seen a lot and been through a lot. I think we could probably do another 2 or 3 of these sessions to get the whole story. But what would that be?
I would say, don't be afraid to ask for help. Like I said, we're a close knit group. In the industry, and there might, every now and then, you might run across a personality. And I honestly can maybe think of one person in 3 markets that might be rough, and you're like, "Whoa, I'm just going to avoid that person." That's fine. That's not who you want to be with. But most people, if you're in the industry and you're starting out, or you're established, and you just want to have coffee with somebody and compare notes, that is awesome. That is the best thing you can do, because a lot of times you feel you're alone in the industry, and you're running a business, and you're competing against these other people, and they're at the same token going to be your best allies. So reach out and get to know them. Just take them for coffee, get to know them. I mean, it doesn't have to be business related in a sense of questions you might have or input they might have for you. It might be just as simple to say, hey, I want to meet you, photographer. I really like your work. I think you're amazing. Because they may call you and say, hey, I need some help next Saturday. Or, hey, I'm busy. I want to give you a referral. That's how it all starts. It's just positive stuff. So get to know your get some friends in the industry and the business, and learn the business side. Spend time learning numbers. Understand how many how many weddings you have to shoot to make a decent income and at what price point, and then understand your market. Like if you're going to go very high end and offer everything to them at a certain price point, then you need to understand what's the average amount of weddings. Then if the person's spending X amount on weddings and you're asking for twice that amount, well, then you realize your client is far and few between. You're going to get a lot of no's before you get a yes, kind of a thing. And then if you do things like wedding shows, I'm very happy with wedding shows. I love wedding shows. And there's times where I've been to wedding shows where I leave very happy and I talk to another photographer there and they're just like, this is the worst ever. I didn't talk to anybody, nothing happened. And I'm like, we talked to the same people, didn't we? I mean, it was the same. What happened? The business side is the key to success in this industry, because you can learn to shoot better, and you can learn to, you can go to a clinic or a seminar or something else in the photography side and build that skill set. But for every hour you put in on photography, you need to put an hour in on business to learn that. And if you do have it, share the information.
That's great. I just have one tidbit to add on here in terms of asking people for help, and you never kind of know where it's going to come. Years ago, when I kind of was getting all my camera stuff, I bought like this enormous, way too big, like Pelican case, because I thought I was going to store it. I was like going to have everything I would ever need all the time, like in this case. And it was like, it was too big. It was like this. I couldn't even explain how bigger than a desk in terms of width. And I needed to get rid of it. We were getting ready to move. And so I had hit up this guy on a local group here, and he did like production stuff. And he said, well, this is actually like perfect for me because, we set up and we need this kind of big thing. And, I was never going to use it going, shoot to shoot. And so he had come and said, hey man, I do editing and stuff. And, if you ever need any help, everyone always says and whatever. And, the next year, I did need help, and I flew him up. He was working in LA, and I flew him up because I knew him and I needed some help with some shoots and stuff. And now I just got off the phone with him earlier tonight about, trying to book him out for next summer to do weddings. And this all just came from him, getting the Pelican case off of a Productions Pete post, 5 years ago. I couldn't even tell you how long ago it's been. So you never know kind of where, those relationships and like people helping you and asking for help and guiding copy and things. So it's interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Chris, this has been so fascinating. I really do mean that in all seriousness. I want to thank you so much for being on. If people want to learn more about you and see your photography and your business, where would you have them check out?
They can go to Chinook Photography, CHINOOK, photography.com. Chinook Photography on Instagram, and Chinook Photography on Facebook.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much, and for being the test of this fascinating new venture of remote podcasting. And I want to thank you so much for your time and coming in after shooting the wedding. And it really means a lot. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Reed. Appreciate it. Keep up the good work, man.
This has been another episode of Get to Know Your Wedding Pro. Check back next week for another wedding vendor interview. Thank you so much.